All right, so today we're going deep on MCDP 10. That's Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication 10. Now, we know you're a Marine, and this is, well, kind of your playbook. It's the foundation for pretty much everything the Marine Corps
Yeah,
does.
you got it. Think of MCDP 10 as like the DNA of the Marine Corps. It defines how Marines fight, operate, and think as a fighting force.
Okay, so right off the bat, MCDP 10 really focuses on this idea of the Marine Corps as an expeditionary force in readiness. What exactly does that mean?
So picture this. You're at home, maybe relaxing a bit, and all of a sudden, bam, you're on a plane, you're headed to the other side of the world. That's the expeditionary part. Being ready to deploy anywhere, anytime.
Okay, so it's about being deployable. But there's that in readiness part. That suggests there's more to it, right? It's not just about being ready to ship out.
Exactly. It's not just about showing up, it's about being ready for anything. Combat, humanitarian aid, whatever comes up, Marines need to be able to adapt and overcome.
So it's about versatility as much as it is about combat power.
You got it. And to really hit this home, NCDP 10 actually quotes General Tony Zinni. He said, being expeditionary is about a high state of readiness and a mindset that's all about flexibility.
And Zinni also talks about having the right structure, the right equipment, right? All of that plays a role.
Absolutely. You need a force that's designed to deploy quickly and efficiently. Specialized equipment, streamlined logistics, the whole 9 yards.
This all sounds very well coordinated. Does MCDP 10 talk about how the Marine Corps achieves this, especially working with other branches of the military?
It absolutely does. And this is where things get interesting. See, Marines often operate as part of a larger joint force, right? Alongside the Army, Navy, Air Force. But even in these joint operations, there's always a Marine Corps component commander, and they report to two bosses.
Two bosses, that sounds kind of tricky.
Well, it's more like a dual chain of command. On one hand, they report to the commandant of the Marine Corps for all the internal stuff like training, discipline, that sort of thing.
Makes sense. A Marine's always a Marine, no matter who they're working with.
Exactly. But at the same time, for operational matters, they report to the Joint Force Commander, the one running the overall show.
So even as part of a bigger operation, Marines still maintain their own chain of command and their unique identity.
Exactly. It's all laid out in MCDP 10.
Now, MCDP 10 keeps mentioning this thing called the MGTF. What exactly assess that?
The MGTF, that's the Marine Air Ground Task Force. It's like the Lego set of Marine power. It's the basic building block for how they organize and deploy.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these MedETF Legos.
So each MedGTF has four key elements. You've got a command element for, making decisions, a ground combat element to, well, fight on the ground,
Yeah.
an aviation combat element to provide air support, and a logistics combat element to keep everything running smoothly.
So it's like a self-contained fighting force. It's got all the pieces it needs to operate on its own.
Exactly. And the cool thing about the MagTF is it's super flexible. You can tailor each element to fit the mission, need more firepower, beef up the ground combat element, facing a threat from the air, bring in more jets and helicopters for the aviation combat element.
So it's adaptable, scalable depending on what's needed.
Exactly. And that adaptability, that's what makes the MGTF so effective for those expeditionary operations we talked about. They can respond to just about anything, from small-scale humanitarian missions all the way up to major combat operations.
I can see why that would be valuable today. Now, MCDP 10 mentions different types of MAD-GTFs, right? So it's not just one size fits all.
Right. There are actually 5 different types of MAD-GTFs, each designed for certain kinds of operations. They range in size from the huge Marine Expeditionary Force, we call that an MEF, all the way down to the Special Purpose Marine Air Ground Task Force, or SPM MAD-GTF.
Wow, 5 different types. That's a lot to keep track of. Can you break down the most common ones for us?
Sure. So starting with the biggest, the MEF. It's like a small army with tens of thousands of Marines and sailors. They're the heavy hitters, capable of large-scale operations like the invasion of Iraq back in 2003.
That's some serious firepower.
Yeah, it is. Then you've got the MEB, the Marine Expeditionary Brigade. It's smaller, more agile, often used for crisis response, security operations like what they did in Afghanistan.
So a MEB is more like a rapid reaction force.
You could say that. And then you've got the MEU, the Marine Expeditionary Unit. These are the smallest of the standing MAD-ETFs. They're usually embarked on Navy ships. They're like the 9/11 force, constantly deployed, ready to respond to anything, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, you name it.
So the MEU is like the tip of the spear, forward deployed, ready to act.
Exactly. And each of these types has a long history of successful operations. Really shows how versatile and effective the MDTF concept is.
Now, we've been focusing on the MAGTF, but are there situations where Marines operate outside of that structure?
Yeah, there are, but it's less common. MCDP 10 acknowledges that Marine units can be task organized in different ways to support certain missions.
So sometimes they're called upon to work outside the traditional MAGTF structure.
Right, like you might have a Marine fighter squadron attached to a Navy aircraft carrier just to add to their capabilities, or a Marine rifle company might be assigned to an Army Special Forces unit for a specific mission.
So it's not always about the big formations. Sometimes it's about smaller, specialized units supporting other forces.
Exactly. And then you have units like Marforcyber and MARSOC. They're highly specialized. They operate outside that typical MAGTF structure.
Hold on, Mar for Cyber, what is that exactly?
Marforcyber is the Marine Corps piece of U.S. Cyber Command. All things cyber, from defense to conducting offensive operations.
So they're the cyber warriors of the Marine Corps.
You got it. And MARSOC, the Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command, that's their contribution to U.S. Special Operations Command. Unconventional warfare, counterterrorism, special recon, that's their world.
So MARSOC is like the elite of the elite, highly trained for those high-stakes missions.
That's a good way to put it. While you might not be directly involved with these non-MAGTF units, it's good to know they exist and understand the broader range of what the Corps can do.
Okay, this is all fascinating. But MCDP 10 goes even deeper, outlining 6 core competencies of the Marine Corps. What are those, and why should our listener care?
These core competencies, they're essentially what make Marines. Well, Marines. They're the heart and soul of the Corps. They define what they bring to the fight, what makes them unique.
So these are the things that set Marines apart from the other branches.
Exactly. They're what make the Marine Corps so valuable to the nation.
I'm definitely ready to hear more about these core competencies. Let's jump in.
All right, let's do it. So the first one, it's called persistent forward naval engagement. Kind of a mouthful, but basically it means the Marine Corps is always out there on the front lines, forward deployed with the Navy, engaging in those coastal regions around the world.
So it's not just about being ready to fight, it's about shaping things, preventing conflict.
Exactly. Think about those Marine Expeditionary units we talked about, constantly sailing around, training with partner nations, responding to crises. That's persistent forward naval engagement in action.
Makes sense. What's next on the list?
Integrated combined arms. This one's all about blending capabilities into a single force. Air, land, sea power, all working together seamlessly.
I could see how that would be effective. Is there like a good historical example of that?
Oh, absolutely. The Battle of Iwo Jima in World War II, that's a classic example. Marines landing ashore, supported by naval gunfire, airstrikes, fighting tenaciously. It was a brutal battle, but a good example of how different fighting forces can be integrated.
Wow, powerful example. What about service-board naval ships? Sounds straightforward, but I'm guessing there's more to it than just hitching a ride with the Navy.
You're right. It's much more than that. Marines have a long history of serving on Navy ships, a deep partnership going way back.
So it's a true partnership, not just a convenience thing.
Right. I mean, they launch fighter jets from carriers, deploy with MEUs on amphibious ships, provide specialized detachments, you name it. It's really baked into the Marine Corps.
All right, joint forcible entry operations.
Yeah.
This one sounds pretty intense.
It is. This competency highlights the Marine Corps' ability to conduct those amphibious assaults, storming a beachhead, seizing and holding ground. Highly specialized, very demanding.
I can only imagine. It takes a lot of guts to pull something like that off.
Absolutely. Think about the invasion of Normandy in World War II. Probably the most famous example of a joint forcible entry operation. And there have been countless others more recently, like the landings in Afghanistan during Operation Enduring Freedom.
So when the world needs a force that can fight its way ashore, the Marines get the call. Okay, what about complex expeditionary operations? What makes these operations so complex?
These are operations in tough environments, often chaotic. Counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, stability operations. You're not just fighting a conventional enemy. It's urban areas, local populations, constantly changing situations.
So it requires a lot of flexibility, cultural awareness, thinking on your feet.
Exactly. Marines are known for that, improvising, adapting, operating in places where others might struggle. Think about the Vietnam War, for example. Complex counterinsurgency, challenging jungle environment. They had to adapt constantly.
Okay, that makes sense. And finally, we have leading joint and multinational operations. This sounds like, I don't know, taking charge in a big way.
Yeah, this one recognizes the Marine Corps' ability to plan, coordinate, lead those large-scale operations, involving forces from different countries. It's not just about leading Marines, it's about leading a whole coalition.
That must take some serious diplomatic skills on top of the military expertise.
Absolutely. Marines are trained to work with allies and partners, bridging cultural and doctrinal differences. Like, a great example is the Marine Corps role in the first Gulf War in 1991, leading that coalition.
Wow, these 6 core competencies really paint a picture, don't they? The versatility, the adaptability, the leadership. That's what defines the Corps.
Yes, it does. And for you, as a Marine, these aren't just abstract ideas. They'll be woven into your entire experience, how you train, how you fight, how you lead.
Okay, so we've got the core competencies down. But MCDP 10 also gets into power projection, a pretty essential concept for an expeditionary force.
Right. Power projection, that's the ability to deploy and sustain military force anywhere in the world quickly. It's about taking the fight to the enemy, not waiting for them.
Sounds pretty straightforward, but I bet there's more to it.
There is. You've got two main methods: air power and sea power. Air power, it's fast but limited in what it can carry. Sea power, slower, but it can move a lot more stuff. Troops, equipment, supplies.
So, air power for a quick hit, sea power for a sustained campaign.
Right on. And with sea power, you've got two key elements: naval maneuver and naval movement. Maneuver is about using ships to project combat power, like airstrikes or amphibious landings. Movement is using ships to transport those large forces, getting them where they need to go.
And that's where the Marine Corps really shines, right? Amphibious operations, sea-based power projection. That's their thing.
You got it. The Marine Corps, they specialize in power projection through those amphibious operations. That's the ability to launch attacks from the sea. And maritime prepositioning forces, or MPFs.
MPFs, those sound interesting. Tell me more.
Think of it like this. You've got these ships loaded up with everything a Marine Expeditionary Brigade would need to fight a war. Tanks, artillery, ammo, food, medical supplies, you name it, it's on those ships. And they're positioned all over the world, ready to move on short notice.
So it's like a floating arsenal. Pre-packed and ready to go. That's pretty efficient.
It is. When a crisis pops up, Marines fly in, link up with that prepositioned equipment, and boom, they're ready to go within days, respond anywhere in the world.
Impressive. Now, MCDP 10 also mentions something called ship-to-objective maneuver. What is that and why is it so important?
That's key for modern amphibious operations. See, instead of those traditional beach landings, which can be slow and risky, the idea is to move forces directly from ships to inland objectives.
So bypass the beach, go straight for the important targets.
Exactly. Faster, more agile, harder to predict, seize the initiative, disrupt the enemy's plans.
I can see how that would be disruptive. We can't talk about the Marine Corps without really getting into amphibious operations. It's their signature, right?
Yeah, you could say that. Amphibious operations, they're complex, challenging, absolutely essential to the Marine Corps. Require special training, equipment, and you gotta really understand the littoral environment.
And MCDP 10 breaks it down into 5 types of amphibious operations, right?
Yep, 5 types, but some are more common than others. We'll start with the most frequent one: amphibious support to other operations. This could be anything from humanitarian aid and disaster relief to supporting security cooperation efforts.
So it's not always about combat. Amphibious forces can be used for all sorts of missions, even those focused on peace and stability.
Right. Another common one is the amphibious raid. It's a quick strike, hit an enemy target, and then get out. A planned withdrawal, like a surgical strike from the sea.
Then you've got the classic amphibious assault. That's probably what comes to mind when most people think of Marines hitting the beach.
Yep, that's the one. The most complex and demanding, establishing a beachhead, pushing inland against enemy resistance. But then you've also got the amphibious withdrawal, kind of the opposite, a strategic retreat from the sea.
Interesting. And lastly, there's the amphibious demonstration. I'm guessing that's more about projecting power than actual combat.
Exactly. It's a show of force, trying to deceive or distract the enemy without necessarily committing to a full-blown attack.
So the type of operation really depends on the goals in the bigger picture.
For sure. And MCDP 10 also stresses how the environment plays a role, in how these operations are planned. It describes 3 basic environments: permissive, uncertain, and hostile.
Can you break those down a bit? What makes each one unique?
Sure. Permissive, that means the host nation is friendly, cooperative, like providing aid in a country that welcomes you. Uncertain, that's more unpredictable, The government might not have full control. Maybe there are hostile groups around. Think of those non-combatant evacuations, getting civilians out of a bad situation.
And hostile, that's the most dangerous. Enemy forces actively opposing you.
Exactly. That's where you see those big amphibious assaults. And in a hostile environment, command and control gets really complex.
How so? What makes it so challenging in that kind of situation?
Well, you got the Navy getting the Marines to the beach, and then the Marines, they're responsible for the fight ashore. You got to have coordination between two different services, often in the middle of a lot of chaos.
It sounds like things could go wrong pretty easily if it's not clear who's doing what.
That's why MCDP 1.0 is so important. It lays out the doctrine, make sure everyone's on the same page, working towards the same goal.
Now, we often think of Marines hitting the beach, but they're also capable of those sustained operations ashore, right? Fighting inland, alongside the Army or other forces.
Absolutely. The Marine Corps, they can operate away from the sea, supporting those longer-term operations inland, often working with the Army or multinational partners.
What are some of the ways they contribute in those kinds of operations?
MCDP 1.0 outlines 4 main roles Marines can play. They can be an enabling force, clearing the way for other units, a decisive force, delivering the knockout blow, an exploitation force, seizing opportunities that others create, or a sustaining force, providing that long-term support.
So versatile, adaptable, filling different roles depending on what's needed?
Exactly. And MCDP 1.0 has tons of historical examples to show this. Like during World War II, the Marines landing on Guadalcanal, they acted as an enabling force, securing the island, paving the way for other Allied units.
That's a great example of their flexibility, how they can contribute to a larger operation. I'm curious about Marine air power and how that fits in, especially when they're part of a bigger joint force.
Good question. It can be a bit complex, but MCDP 1.0 addresses it. Essentially, the MAGTF commander, they stay in control of the Marines' aircraft.
So the planes, helicopters, they're mainly there to support the Marines on the ground.
That's the general idea, yeah. But the Joint Force Commander, the one overseeing the whole thing, they also have a say in how those assets are used.
So it's about balancing support for the Marines on the ground with the bigger picture, the joint mission.
Exactly. MCDP 1.0 has a very specific policy to make sure things run smoothly. It states that the primary mission of the aviation combat element is to support the MAGTF's ground combat element. But it requires the MAGTF commander to make a certain number of sorties, that's individual aircraft missions available to the Joint Force Commander.
So the MAGTF commander controls the aircraft, but the Joint Force Commander gets to assign them certain missions.
Right. Things like air defense, protecting friendly forces, long-range strikes, reconnaissance, all those things that contribute to the overall effort, even if they're not directly supporting the Marines on the ground right then.
So it's all about the bigger picture. And these sorties assigned by the Joint Force Commander, those aren't considered excess sorties, right?
Right. An excess sortie is any mission that's available after the MAGTF's own needs are met.
Okay, so once the Marines have enough air support for themselves, any leftover sorties can be tasked by the Joint Force Commander to help other units or missions.
Exactly. And MCDP 1.0 says these excess sorties should go to the Joint Force Commander through the Joint Force Air Component Commander, the JFSCC.
Right, the JFSCC, they're basically the air boss for the whole operation.
Yeah.
They decide how air power gets used across the entire force.
You got it. Making sure air power is used the right way to achieve the mission.
Now, even though MCDP 1.0 lays out this policy, it also mentions that the combatant commander has the final say, right?
You're right. It emphasizes that the geographic combatant commander or the Joint Force Commander, they always have the authority. They can assign missions, redirect efforts, make sure everyone is working together to achieve the overall objective.
So the big boss can always override the MAGTF commander's priorities if they need to.
Exactly. In a joint environment, flexibility is key. Everyone has to adapt to the needs of the mission, even if it means changing things up.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've really gotten into MCDP 1.0, the details, all of that. But it feels like more than just a manual, like there's a philosophy there, a mindset the Marine Corps is trying to build.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's not just tactics and procedures, right? MCDP 1.0 digs into the WHY of what Marines do. Adaptability, initiative, being proactive, almost like a warrior ethos,
So it's cultivating a way of thinking, not just skills.
Exactly. It talks about mental agility, making decisions fast in uncertain situations, taking calculated risks, seizing opportunities.
And those are qualities that apply beyond just the battlefield, any kind of leadership role, really.
Oh, for sure. And MCDP 1.0 makes it clear. Being a Marine, it's not just a job, it's a calling. It takes a deep commitment to those core values: honor, courage, commitment.
So it's preparing Marines not just for the tactical stuff, but for those moral, ethical challenges they'll face.
You're getting it. MCDP 10, it emphasizes operating within the law of war, respecting human rights, treating non-combatants with dignity. It's winning battles, yeah, but also winning the peace after.
So victory isn't just about military goals. It's about winning hearts and minds, creating a stable outcome, a just one.
Exactly. And that takes understanding the complexities of modern warfare, right? The human element, it's just as important as the tactics.
This makes me think about the emphasis on leadership. MCDP 10 really seems to value building trust and respect. It's not just following orders, it's empowering Marines at every level.
You got it. It talks about small unit cohesion, how that bond between Marines, that can be decisive in combat. Having motivated, well-trained individuals led by leaders who are competent but also compassionate. That's what makes the difference.
We've covered a lot today, from the structure of the Marine Corps to the big ideas behind MCDP 10, a true deep dive.
Oh.
What are some key takeaways you hope our listener is walking away with?
The biggest one, I think, MCDP 10, is a living document. It's not static, it's evolving. It shows how the Marine Corps is constantly trying to adapt, to be the best, to achieve victory. And victory, it's not just about battles won, it's about those values that define the Corps.
It's a guide, really, for how to think, how to act, how to lead in a complex world. And for our listener, at the start of their Marine Corps journey, understanding this document, those values, it'll serve them well on the battlefield and beyond.
Well said. And MCDP 10 says it best. The Marine Corps is more than just a fighting force. It is an idea, a spirit, a tradition that embodies the very essence of American determination and fighting spirit.
Powerful stuff. And on that note, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into MCDP 10. Hopefully it's given you a good foundation.
And to our listener, keep exploring MCDP 10. Dig into those publications, learn the history, the values. The more you know, the better prepared you'll be.
Remember, the world's always changing. The Marine Corps changes with it. Where do you think the focus will be in the years to come? How will they adapt to new threats, new technologies? Something to think about as you continue your journey.
Thanks for listening.